My parents sold their house of 30 years and handed every dollar, $650,000, to my brother as a wedding gift. I barely had time to process that betrayal before the next one hit. When I refused to evict my tenants so they could stay with me for a while, they showed up at the property with suitcases pounding on the door like they already owned the place. That was the moment I realized they weren't just crossing a boundary, they were invading my life. And what I did next left them stunned in a way they never saw coming. I should probably start by telling you who I was before everything snapped. My name is Nora, and for the last 8 years, I've built a small but thriving interior design and custom furniture studio out of sheer stubbornness and sawdust. Most days, you'd find me in a linen shirt jeans and my worn leather apron hair tied back sanding down walnut boards while the workshop heater hummed in the corner. It's the kind of life people underestimate until they see what those hands can make. And maybe that's always been my story, underestimated until pushed too far. I grew up in a house where the rules were unspoken but sharp. Derek, the only son, was the investment. I, the daughter, was expected to be understanding. I heard that word my entire childhood. Be understanding when Derek gets the new bike. Be understanding when Derek's summer camp costs more than your entire school year. Be understanding when your brother needs help with college, but you can figure it out. So I did figure it out, 3 part-time jobs at once, eating dollar ramen, stitching together a degree I paid for myself. Meanwhile, Derek's tuition was wired straight from my parents' account the moment it was due. My mother used to say it with a smile, like it was a compliment. Girls just don't need as much help, sweetie. You're stronger. At the time, I didn't realize she meant it literally, less help, more burden. As an adult, I kept my distance. Not because I didn't love them, but because I could breathe better when I wasn't being squeezed into the role of the forever responsible child. Then, I married Ethan, the first person who truly saw me, not the version shaped by guilt or obligation, but the woman who fought her way into a craft she loved. We bought a cozy home in Highlands Ranch and started talking about building a family. Quiet mornings with coffee on the porch. Late-night naming lists for the baby growing inside me. The soft kind of future I'd worked years to earn. And part of that stability came from the Lakewood rental property, a small, steady investment I bought with my own savings. Jake and Amanda lived there, a young couple trying to get on their feet. They paid on time, kept the place clean, never caused trouble. In my mind, they were the kind of tenants any landlord would bend over backward to keep. Which is why when my parents called one afternoon sounding breathless with excitement, I had no reason to brace myself. They told me they'd sold their house 30 years of memories, the porch swing Dad built the kitchen, Mom painted 3 times. I imagined them finally taking cruises, gardening, settling into a slower life. I even smiled when Mom described how fast the place sold. Then she said it. We gave the money to Derek. All $650,000. Isn't that wonderful? I pressed the phone to my ear, waiting for the part where she laughed or said, "Just kidding," or even paused long enough to hear my silence. But she kept talking, listing the amenities of the penthouse Derek had found downtown. And then came the line that shifted something deep inside me. "We'll be moving into your rental for a little while. Just tell those tenants to leave." I don't remember what I said after that. Something flat and polite, the kind of response you give when your brain disconnects to protect itself. I hung up and stared at the wall of my studio while the scent of freshly cut oak floated around me, sharp and grounding. My parents had just given my brother $650,000 and without hesitation decided my property, my investment, would become their fallback plan. No request, no conversation. Just an expectation wrapped in entitlement. I told Ethan that night. He stood at the kitchen counter, hands braced on the granite, listening without interrupting. "You're not actually considering evicting them," he said gently. "Of course not." The answer was immediate, instinctual. "It's not even legal." "And it's not right," he added. I nodded, but my stomach tightened because I knew what was coming. My parents didn't handle boundaries, they bulldozed them. The calls began the next morning. Mom, first, her voice sugary and fragile. "Nora, honey, you sounded stressed yesterday. We just need a place for a little while." Then Dad, sterner. "Your mother is upset. You should fix this." I repeated myself over and over. I can't remove tenants under a valid lease. It's illegal. It's unethical. But logic only works on people willing to hear it. By noon, Mom was crying. By evening, Dad was lecturing me about family responsibility. By the next day, relatives I hadn't heard from in months suddenly had my number memorized. Aunt Patricia called at 7 in the morning. Your parents gave everything to help Derek start his life, and you can't do one little thing. It's not little, I said. Well, you're the successful one, she snapped. You should help. That was the script. I was the capable one, the reliable one, the daughter whose comfort was negotiable because she could handle it. Derek texted me that afternoon. They need somewhere to stay. Be flexible, sis. Be flexible. As if that were the magical phrase that could erase Lisa's laws or basic decency. I didn't respond. But the real explosion happened 3 days later. I was in my studio sanding the edge of a maple countertop when my phone buzzed nonstop. Jake's name lit up the screen. His voice trembled the moment I answered. Nora, there are people at the door saying they're moving in. They have suitcases. They're yelling. My heart dropped. Describe them. It's an older couple. They said they're your parents. Of course they did. I told him to stay inside, not to open the door, that I was on my way. Then I grabbed my keys, dust still on my jeans, and drove across Denver with my pulse hammering against the steering wheel. When I turned onto the Lakewood Street, I saw them instantly, my parents on the front porch, 2 large suitcases beside them, grocery bags dangling from Mom's wrist like they were checking into a vacation rental. Mom was pounding on the door so hard the frame rattled. Dad stood stiffly beside her, looking like he was already rehearsing the lecture he'd give me for being difficult. I stepped out of my car. What are you doing? Mom spun around, furious and relieved all at once. They won't let us in. It's not your house, I said. It's family property, she insisted, as if saying it made it true. Dad took a step toward me. We've been in a hotel for almost 2 weeks waiting for you to handle this. You created that situation, I replied. You sold your house. You gave away your money. That doesn't make my rental your backup plan. Mom's voice cracked, switching to her well-practiced heartbreak. How can you talk to us this way? After everything we've done for you. Jake cracked the door open just an inch. Do we need to call someone? He asked quietly. No, I said. Then I looked directly at my parents. But they will if you don't leave. The porch fell silent. The kind of sharp, vibrating silence that comes right before something breaks. And in that moment, I understood exactly what I was up against. Not confusion, not desperation, but entitlement so deep they truly believed my life existed to cushion their choices. They left the porch that day only because Jake picked up his phone as if he were about to dial. Dad muttered something about, "This isn't over." Mom cried loudly enough for the neighbors to peek through blinds, and then they dragged their suitcases back to the car like 2 people gravely wronged. I watched them drive away with a cold, hollow ache spreading across my ribs. It wasn't guilt. It was the realization that this was only the first attempt. By the next morning, the narrative had changed, and I'd apparently been assigned the villain role. My phone lit up before sunrise with a message from my cousin Brandon. I can't believe you'd abandon your parents like this. Then another from Aunt Patricia. We heard you refused to let them stay. They're practically homeless. Homeless. That was the word they chose, even though my parents had willingly handed their entire nest egg to Derek without so much as a second thought. The group chat I'd been forcibly added to, filled with passive-aggressive messages about family duty and honoring your elders. Not one person asked what had actually happened. Not one asked about Jake and Amanda or the legal lease. This wasn't concern, it was a coordinated guilt campaign. Ethan watched me read message after message while I sat at the kitchen island, one hand on my belly. You can block them, he murmured. I know, I said. And I did know. But blocking them didn't solve the larger truth my parents believed they had unrestricted access to my life, my home, my resources. If I didn't stop it cleanly now, it would bleed into every part of the future we were trying to build. Around that time, news about Derek started trickling in. Through my cousin Maria, one of the few neutral voices, I learned that the bank had denied Derek's mortgage application on the penthouse. They needed verification of income, she told me. He didn't have any. Without the loan, he couldn't close. Without closing the deposit, my parents' $650,000 wasn't coming back. Suddenly, their urgency made sense. They'd thrown everything into Derek's dream and now had nowhere to land. 2 days later, Derek himself called. "Look," he said, sounding annoyed rather than embarrassed, "things are tight right now. Brittany and I still need to pay the venue. It's only $18,000. Can you help? Only $18,000? As if I kept stacks of cash in the pantry for moments like this? I didn't even hesitate. No. His silence wasn't surprise, it was offense. "Wow," he said. "Real supportive sis." Supportive. Another word twisted into a weapon. That night, after one more round of messages from relatives insisting I step up, something inside me locked into place. I opened my laptop and began writing an email, not emotional, not defensive, but factual. A timeline of events, screenshots of the lease, records of the sale, every detail in clear, undeniable language. At the end, I added one line. "If anyone believes my parents deserve housing more than my tenants do, please let me know when they can move in with you." Then I hit send to 30 people. By the next morning, the group chat was silent. The silence after my email lasted almost a full day, long enough for me to hope briefly that the worst had passed. But entitlement doesn't disappear. It waits, reshapes itself, and returns wearing a softer mask. It was a Saturday morning in early spring. Ethan and I were in the kitchen, sunlight spilling across the counters while we argued playfully about baby names. For the first time in weeks, my shoulders felt loose. My phone wasn't buzzing. My parents hadn't called. Even Derek had gone quiet. Peace felt foreign but warm. Then the doorbell chimed, not once, repeatedly, insistently. Ethan checked the driveway. His voice dropped. "Nora, it's them." I opened the Ring app, and there they were, my parents on the porch, dressed nicely, as if they were arriving for a holiday dinner, rather than ambushing the daughter they'd been attacking for weeks. Mom held a bouquet of flowers. Dad carried a grocery bag. Mom leaned toward the camera, smiling in a way that felt more like performance than apology. "Sweetheart, we brought the ingredients for your favorite pot roast. Let us in." Ethan looked at me. This is manipulation. I knew. I felt it in the tightening of my chest, the way her voice tugged at an old instinct to soothe, to give in, to make things easier. That was the role I'd played my entire childhood, but I wasn't that girl anymore. Dad cleared his throat, speaking directly to the camera. "We've had time to reflect. We made mistakes. Let's just talk like adults. Talk like adults." A phrase he'd used every time he wanted control disguised as reason. I stayed where I was, leaning against the hallway wall phone still in hand. I didn't open the door. Mom kept going, her voice trembling. "Please, honey, we've been staying somewhere awful. We're tired. We miss you." Ethan whispered. "They're not here to apologize. They're here to gain access." He was right. Every "we're sorry" was vague, conditional, and conveniently paired with a request for me to do the very thing I'd already told them I wouldn't. When I didn't respond, Dad's tone shifted instantly. The performance cracked. "Nora, this is childish. Open the door." Mom echoed him louder. "We are your parents. We deserve respect. Respect." They used the word like a blade. When neither of us moved, Dad stepped back and crossed his arms. "If you don't let us in, we'll stay here until you do. You can't ignore us forever." My pulse thudded steadily, not panicked, just clear. This was it. The final escalation. They wanted a scene, a crack, any sign I could be guilted back into compliance. Instead, I opened the phone app and dialed. "Non-emergency police line," the operator answered. I exhaled. "I need to report ongoing trespassing. Same individuals as a previous incident at my rental property." Ethan watched me with quiet pride. I watched myself in a way too like someone finally stepping into the life she wanted. Outside, my parents kept talking, unaware I'd just made the call that would redefine our relationship. "Think about the baby," Mom pleaded suddenly, as if the mention of my pregnancy might soften me. "Don't you want us involved? Not like this," I thought. Not with ownership instead of love. Dad knocked again, harder this time. Nora stopped being dramatic. It was almost laughable coming from the people staging a doorstep intervention with flowers and guilt. When the police car turned onto our street, their heads snapped toward it. Mom's face crumpled instantly. Dad's jaw clenched. They both stepped back uncertain for the first time. The officer approached calmly. "Ma'am, sir, the homeowner has requested you leave the property." Mom pointed toward the door. "We're her parents." "She's confused." "She's not," Ethan said from behind me. The officer nodded at them. "You need to leave now. You've been asked before." Dad looked directly at the camera, eyes hard. "You'll regret this, Nora." But regret was never on the table. Relief was. They left slowly, dramatically, like actors hoping the audience would feel sorry for them. The car door slammed, the engine turned over, and they drove away without another word. When the officer left, Ethan wrapped his arms around me. I didn't cry. Instead, something inside me unlocked quietly, decisively. A breath I'd been holding for years finally left my body. But the day wasn't done. That evening, my phone buzzed again. Derek. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "What did you do?" he barked. "Mom is hysterical. Dad's furious." "I protected my home," I said. "You humiliated them." "They created the situation," I replied. "I enforced a boundary." He scoffed. "Unbelievable. They gave me everything to build my future, and you can't even give them a place to stay." There it was. The hierarchy laid bare. They gave you everything, I said, softly. Not me. A long silence stretched between us. "Then, you're going to pay for this," he hissed. I hung up. But the real ending wasn't a call or confrontation. It came 2 days later in a plain envelope delivered to my parents' new apartment, the one bedroom they'd finally rented when all their options fell apart. A formal notice drafted by my attorney. Cease trespassing or face further legal action. Any additional attempts to enter my properties would be documented and submitted. According to Maria, my parents went pale reading it. Not angry, not devastated, reeling. In the weeks that followed, the noise around me finally quieted. My parents moved into a modest one-bedroom on the edge of town, nothing like the life they'd imagined when they handed Derek $650,000, but it was the only place they could afford. The calls from relatives faded too, once they realized the version of the story they'd been fed didn't hold up against fax leases and the police report. Entitlement is loud at first, but it dies quickly when no one feeds it. Jake and Amanda stayed in the Lakewood house grateful and steady, sending me updates about the garden they'd planted in the backyard. Their kindness felt like the universe reminding me I'd chosen the right people to protect. At home, quiet returned, real quiet, the kind that settles into the walls and stays. Ethan and I finished the nursery brushing soft green paint onto the walls while sunlight drifted through the window. Every stroke felt like reclaiming something space safety, a future unmarred by manipulation. For the first time in my life, my boundaries weren't questioned or punished. They simply existed, and the life on the other side of them was peaceful. Looking back, people assume the hardest part was calling the police on my own parents. It wasn't. The hardest part was realizing how long I'd lived smaller than I needed to, shrinking myself to keep the peace, accepting scraps of respect, because I was told daughters should be understanding, but peace built on silence isn't peace at all. It's surrender. And the day I stopped surrendering, my life finally opened. My parents may never understand the line I drew, but that line is why my child will grow up in a home shaped by love, not obligation. That's the legacy I choose. If any part of my story felt familiar, share your experience in the comments. And if you want more real stories about family boundaries and finding your voice, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one.